Hi everyone! So today I'm going to show you how to make a doll sweater out of a pair of men's knee socks. I know it sounds weird. Some people were asking me about this when I showed a picture of Theo here, Clarice's brother, wearing this sweater that I made. So I decided to do a tutorial and I hope you'll find it helpful. So you do still need a pattern to do this, but I'll show you how to arrange the pattern pieces on the sock so that you can use the fabric and make it into a sweater. So let's get started. So I've got all my pieces laid out here. I've got my pattern pieces, and for the socks you want to make sure you get ones that are about 3.5 inches wide and about 15 inches long above the foot part. So you want to make sure this is long enough so that you can fit all your pattern pieces on there. And I'm going to start by cutting off the end of the sock because we're going to use that as a banding that goes around like the waist part. So I'm going to cut 3/4 of an inch off each edge, which will leave about a 1/2 inch binding. Once you got these cut, you're going to make a slice up the middle. There shouldn't be any seam here, so you can kind of just pick wherever you think works best. Open that up and do the same on this side. So now we're going to use the pattern pieces. We're going to line it up so that the top of the sleeve is going to reach about here. Now I know it looks like it's not wide enough, but we're going to put one sleeve on each side, so once we open up the sock, it'll be wide enough. And we're going to line up these pieces so that we get as much of the pattern as possible. If your pattern goes all the way up, by pattern I mean design, the design goes all the way up to the top, then you don't have to worry too much. But here we want to get as much of the design as possible on the top. So I'm gonna push this up as high as I can without going into the heel part. And I'm going to line this up here. So we have a little bit of extra here, but that's fine. And I'm going to pin my front piece on here. I'm going to slice up the side of the sock, and I'm going to do it along this side just because there's more pattern up here, so when we lie our piece out we want to have that go up there. So I'm going to cut up this end right along where it's kind of folded already. And then I'm just going to make sure I have enough here and cut across the top. So this we can lie out flat. And place our pattern piece right there. And make sure you do the little markings. I have these little like divots cut or marked on the pattern, and I'm just gonna do a little clip right there so that I know the center top of the piece and which side goes towards the back. This will be towards the front, this is towards the back. And now we're gonna do the same thing on the other side using the back pattern. So for my pattern I use Velcro to close the back. If you're worried about the Velcro catching on the knit, you can use buttons or snaps or something like that, but I just use Velcro. So I don't leave a lot of extra room here. Ideally this would be a little bit wider to have more room for the Velcro, but because it's stretchy enough, it should work. So I'm gonna make sure I line up the same area as I did here so that these pieces are gonna match up. So I'm gonna match my patterns right there, or my plaid, or argyle, match the argyle, and line up my pattern piece so that it's going to match when I sew them together. And then just make sure I have enough left up here, which looks fine, and I will cut this piece out. And I'm just gonna cut up the edge here so that we get the maximum amount of width and don't lose any extra by cutting some off that way. And then I'm gonna do the same thing on this side. And then just trim it down to match the shape of the pattern a little bit more. Okay, so these we don't need, and now we just need the last sleeve, and we're gonna do the same thing we did on the other side, cut up along the heel. Make sure you flip this over so you have one of each side, or one of each sleeve. You don't have two rights or two lefts. So flip your pattern piece over. So now we have all our basic pattern pieces. We've got our front, two backs, and our sleeves. So the only thing that's left is the cuff on the edge of the sleeve, and for that we're going to use part of the foot that's left. And you want to cut a 1 inch by 4 inches length. So I'm going to cut this at 1 inch width. And then just open it up like that. Okay, so here's my two 4-inch cuffs. Just go with the sleeves over here. So I'm also going to do a cuff around the neck to give it sort of that crew neck look. So there'll be a little piece added on to the edge of the neck. And for that, I'm also going to use the end of one of the toes. And I'm going to cut, again, a 1 inch width. Make sure it's nice and straight. And then I'm going to open that up. And that will be the neck piece. So this should end up being about 8 inches, and it has a good amount of stretch, so that should be fine. Even though it's gonna be shorter than the length of the neck, you want it to kind of have that stretched out look, because that makes it look more like the ribbing that a normal sweater would have. So now we have all of our pieces, and we're gonna start sewing it together. So to start off, we're going to use the front and back, and we're going to sew them together at the shoulder seams, and then we'll do the sleeves next. So I sewed my shoulder seams, and I pressed the seam allowances toward the back, and I also serged the edges of my seams because I have a serger and I love using it. If you don't have a serger, you can also just do a zigzag stitch just so you get a nice clean finish on your edges of your seams. So now that we have that sewed, we can do the sleeves, and you're gonna look for your little notch that you cut. See right here, I've got my little notch there, and I know this goes towards the back, so that means this is this sleeve over here, because that'll match up on the back, and this is this sleeve over here. So I'm just going to use the little notch on top to line up with the shoulder seam, pin that there, and then pin along the edge of the shoulder. And I'm going to do that on both and stitch the sleeves on. So here I have the sweater so far. I have the sleeves sewn in right here. And this is a sleeve press, which is used to iron sleeves on people's shirts. And I like to use them for my doll clothes because it helps make ironing much easier, because you can get around those curves. So as you can see, I kind of lay the sleeve over the end of the sleeve press and use that to press the seam allowance towards the body and away from the sleeve. So it's gonna come in this way, and that just helps you press it. So now we're gonna attach our sleeve cuffs, and you're gonna fold them in half with the right sides out and stitch them to the ends of the sleeves facing this way. And then once they get stitched, they will flip out, and you'll have a little cuff on the end. So I'm going to pin this folded in half to the end of my sleeve with the seam allowances facing outward. You might have to stretch it a little bit, which is fine because you want to kind of have that gathered look at the end of the sleeve like a cuff. So I'm going to stitch those on now, and I'm also going to do the neck cuff, which is right here. I'm going to do the same thing, folding it in half, and I'm going to pin it along the edge of the neck, and I'm going to mark the center and make sure I get that matching with the center of the neck. So there's my center. And I'm going to match that up with the center here, which I can tell a bit by the argyle where the center is. Pin this along the edge, and I'm going to sew these on. So here's my sweater now. I have the cuffs sewn on and the seam allowance pressed underneath toward the sleeve so that we get that nice little cuffed edge, and the same around the neck with the seam allowance pressed down toward the sweater. The next step is to sew the side seam / arm seam, and we're going to fold the right sides together and make sure you match these seams here and the ends, and we're going to stitch that on either side. So we'll pin with the seam allowance going towards the sweater and away from the sleeve. Your seam allowance is going towards the sleeve here. And I'm missing another pin, but I'll pin the end and sew those seams there. Okay, so our sweater is starting to look more like a sweater. I have the side seams sewn and turned right side out, and so we're almost done. Here are the two binding pieces that we cut off the end of the socks, and we're going to cut one of them in half. This one is a tad longer, so I think I'll cut that one in half to use for the back. So now I'm going to sew these together here, and then I'm going to attach that to the bottom here by matching those seams and sewing the right sides together. So it'll look like that when I have these stitched together. So I just want to say quickly before I actually sew this banding on the sweater, make sure you line up the edges that are the finished edge all along the same line. Make sure you don't like accidentally flip this backwards so that you have the unfinished edge matched up with the finished edge. So now I have these sewn together. Side seams are on one side and the finished edge is here, and I'm going to sew this with the right sides together onto the sweater. Now I have my end stitched on. As you can see, I have the seam allowance pressed up towards the sweater, or towards the body of the sweater, and we've got a nice edge here. So the last step is the closure in the back, and I'm going to use Velcro as I said before. I also serged the ends of these, and you can use hem tape or something like that if you don't have a serger, or if you just want to try to zigzag. That's up to you. I also recommend doing a stay stitch along this edge because, as you can see, it gets a little bit stretched out when you sew it, especially if you used a serger or a zigzag stitch. So just do a long straight stitch and then pull the ends of the threads to kind of gather it in, not so that it's lumpy, but so that it lays more flat and not stretched out. And then we're going to sew the Velcro on. So I like to use the rough part of the Velcro on this side, and because I have it serged, I can just stitch it right on top here. And then on the other side, I'm just going to fold under about 1/4 of an inch, or maybe even a little bit less. Well, that's about 1/4 of an inch under this way, and I'm going to stitch the soft Velcro on this side, like that. And now we have a finished sweater, and we have a nice clean finished closure. So now let's have Theo model for you.